Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of the Jets Life podcast. Preseason's wrapped up. The Jets finished up their preseason with a victory over the Giants, where Aaron Rodgers got the start and had one drive where it stalled after a couple of first downs. Came out, defense looked elite, looked magnificent. That defensive line is as advertised against the Giants' backups. They were able to get Tyrod Taylor all flurried out and got a couple sacks on him. And Aaron Rodgers was able to end the day with a touchdown to Garrett Wilson. So everything from that game, as far as from seeing the starters, went at pretty much as well as you can expect. Again, the Giants did play their backups, but the Jets offense and the Jets defense did what they were supposed to do. Went in there and got off to a 14-0 lead, and that was the end of it for the starters. But the big news, obviously, as we record this episode on August 30th, the Jets' 53-man roster has officially been set. Obviously, a few tinkers that are going to have to be made. The Jets did cut Nick Bodden, and they also did cut Thomas Morstead, their punter. So they currently have no punter on the roster. But as Thomas Morstead said on a post, I believe via Twitter, that everyone needs to relax. He'll be back. This seems like just a move that the Jets spoke with him, and it's just roster gymnastics, trying to get that 53-man roster. Maybe make a couple of moves to get the roster down to 51 to bring these two back. But yeah, based on everything you've seen from the preseason training camp, they're obviously they need a punter on the roster, and Thomas Morstead definitely fits that bill, being a reliable punter. And then from a fullback standpoint, it looks like they were using Nick Bottom pretty frequently in the offense. So definitely, both these guys are intended to come back. A couple other moves um, of note at the running back position. Bam Knight being the odd man out in the running back room. Jets signed Dalvin Cook. They already had Brees Hall, Michael Carter, Izzy. You know, really it came down to that number 4 running back spot between Michael Carter and Bam Knight. And I think, although Bam did show a lot last year in a limited period of time, Michael Carter showed a lot in his rookie year over the duration of a season where, before the draft, we felt pretty comfortable with Bam as our, with Michael Carter as our starter. It wasn't until the second round of the draft where all of a sudden the Jets pick Brees Hall, and it's like, oh, we can upgrade this position a little bit. We get a playmaker in the backfield, and glad they did. Brees had a outstanding year his rookie year. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, Bam Knight went undrafted. I think to this point, I mean, I could be wrong, but I checked earlier today. Bam still has not been claimed on waivers, so it's possible that he come back on the practice squad, or maybe he checks his options elsewhere to see if he can sign on with a different team. But obviously, this running back room, you kind of expected somebody to be the odd man out. You didn't think it would be Izzy. You didn't think it would be obviously Brees and Dalvin with us just bringing them in. So it came down to Michael Carter and Bam, and I think the Jets have a little bit more, see a little more upside with Michael Carter, which obviously higher draft positioning makes sense there. Another shock from the 53-man roster perspective, the Jets kept 7 wide receivers. I think a lot of the offseason we kind of, looked at this position and, we had it chalked up to Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Nicole Hardman, Randall Cobb, and obviously Corey Davis, who obviously we all know news from last week. He's retired. So it left that 5th wide receiver position open. I think when you look at the for the past few preseason games and what he did during training camp, I think that 5th wide receiver spot pretty much kind of chalked down to Xavier Gibson just because of his what he does from a special team standpoint. I got a little bit fond of Jason Brownlee and what he does as a receiver with his size. So I was always kind of thinking like, okay, we're going to keep those top 5, including Corey Davis, obviously before his retirement, and then who's going to be that 6th guy when Xavier Gibson was kind of showing that skill set as a special teamer. Kind of thought Jason Brownlee would be that odd man out, but they end up keeping 7, and that 7th guy being Irv Charles, being that additional wide receiver. Is this what the receiver room looks like for the rest of the season? Who knows? Maybe the Jets still kind of explore the options of upgrading the position later on later in the season, before the trade deadline, which falls on October 31st, Halloween. So definitely something to kind of look at. I think from a overall standpoint, the receiver room has talent, has potential, but I think you're missing that top tier guy behind Garrett Wilson, a good secondary option. A lot of the elite offenses in the league now, it's not just that number one wide receiver, it's that number one A and number one B. Uh, a lot of teams are trying to get to. So right now, obviously, Garrett Wilson is our 1A. Is Lazard our 1B? Is, Mecole Hardman gonna step up as a slot? I think that you just look at that receiver room, and I think we just need that. I mean, it would be nice to get that extra player in there, but where does that come from, is the major question. Another position of note, the tight end room, I think we all knew Ozama, Conklin, and Rucker were gonna be our top 3 tight ends, not in any particular order. Um And then the fourth guy, you know, obviously just drafted Zach Kuntz, so you thought that he had the inside track to the position as the fourth option if we kept four tight ends, but Kenny Yeboah has sparked a lot during the course of training camp. When you see big touchdowns in the red zone, you've seen Kenny Yeboah usually on the other end of the passes, whether it be from Zach or from Rogers. Kenny Yeboah has been involved pretty frequently, so obviously he's earned a lot of praise from this coaching staff, and rightfully so. He's looked solid over his starts with the Jets. Here's a guy that came in. This would be his third year. Both years um, had stints on the practice squad, and here he is making the initial 53-man roster. So proud of somebody that we claimed as an undrafted free agent, and he's worked his way from the ground up and has earned a spot on this team. Again, this is the initial 53. I think we kept four tight ends last year, and eventually kind of moved into the regular season and adjusted our roster accordingly. So you know, um, what does it look like a few weeks from now could look completely different. But proud of Kenny for getting the praise and earning the coach's respect, and earning that spot on the 53-man roster. Defensive line, I think we all kind of envisioned that this team was going to keep around 10 defensive linemen. I personally thought Tanzel Smart looked pretty solid from a run defense standpoint for this team. I thought that he would be an 11th defensive lineman, but he did not make the 53-man roster. I know he had some sort of injury during the final preseason game, so wonder if there's some sort of where they claim him as and apply him to the injured list or something. Maybe that's something that we kind of look at moving forward. But 10 defensive linemen, I think that's kind of more or less where we thought we were going to be. Salah loves his defensive lineman, thought maybe he'd squeeze in Tanzel Smart, but not the case on the initial roster. And then linebackers, I always thought that we were going to keep around four. And that's what we kept last year on our initial 53-man roster. Um, but apparently, what we saw from Hard Knocks, that first episode, that love affair that Robert Saleh has with Chaz Surratt is real, because Chaz Surratt is that fifth linebacker that we've kept behind C.J. Mosley, um, Jamian Sherwood, Quincy Williams, and Zaire Barnes, who we just recently drafted in this past April's draft. So again, I expected us to keep four linebackers, but apparently Chad Surratt has earned enough respect to warrant us keeping a fifth linebacker. So I mean, overall, I think for the rest of the roster, everything kind of fell out as you expected. Um, from the safety position, I know a lot of us kind of really kind of earned or Trey Dean earned a lot of our respect over the preseason, led the team in tackles. Didn't really play in the final preseason game, which to me was a little bit of a shock. I thought that maybe with him not playing, maybe he earned that roster spot, similar to how Tony Adams barely played throughout the entire preseason. I thought maybe the Jets were, figured he's on our roster, let's keep him out. But again, I mean, they also did start all their starters, so maybe that's was kind of obnoxious by me or kind of oversight by me. But I mean, Trey Dean did clear waivers, so the Jets were able to add him to the practice squad. There's somebody maybe down the road, as we groom him, as he develops, maybe earns a spot as an additional safety down the road. I know we all know Salah loves the linebacker position, but he also loves moving safeties into that like additional linebacker role because of their coverage skills. Maybe this is something where Trey Dean kind of earns that right to be that additional, you know, linebacker in passing situations. We'll see, but I think that kind of from what we saw out of him as an undrafted free agent, I think the Jets have done really well, especially at the safety position with late round draft picks and undrafted free agents. We saw Pinnock, unfortunately, we let him go last year. He did not clear waivers, and the Giants picked him up, and he ended up having a very good season with them. Tony Adams last year was an undrafted free agent we brought in, and now he's our day one starter at the free safety position, and now Trey Dean. So it's 3 years in a row that we've done pretty well on the undrafted free agent and late round draft picks at the safety position. So wonder what can come for Trey Dean, the rest of the safety position. I think it kind of went as we would have expected. No major surprise there with the safeties. So again, 53-man roster set, and there has been some circulation of news regarding a particular player that might become available or potentially is going to be available. Um, Nick, sorry, dropped off for a second there. But Nick Bosa has, there was some circulation that him and the 49ers are at an impasse with the contract negotiations. They're pretty far apart from what we hear. And here's what I got to say about the Nick Bosa thing and Adams. I threw Adams on here too because obviously the situation in Oakland, we'll see how that all shakes out. But Oakland looks like a team that's kind of on that next transition here. It doesn't make sense for them to have a number one wide receiver. Obviously, there's a lot of cap tied to him for the next couple of years. So if they were to move him, that would, obviously kind of hinder them for the rest of this year and potentially future years. So I'll address both of these positions. Obviously, either one of these players would be a magnificent addition to this team, and I'd be all for it. But when you look at both these players, Bosa primarily is going to cost a lot of draft capital. You're looking at potentially, a 2025 first round pick, mid round picks in this year, and then not to mention the cap charge that's going to come with that. If you look around the league, the top players getting paid at the defensive end spot. You look at the Myles Garrett contract; he's making about 25 million a year. You look at Max Crosby; he's making somewhere in the neighborhood of around 23 million a year. And then you look at Trey Hendrickson, and I think Leonard Williams also falls in that category, making around 21 million. And I think based on what he's done throughout the first few years of his career, I think he finds himself in a position where he wants to get paid to exceed these players potentially. So obviously the Jets just paid Quinn Williams. So do you tie up that much money at the defensive line position when you already have a pretty deep unit? What's it going to cost? You're going to have to move a player like Bryce Huff potentially to bring in Bosa. Obviously, all these, not saying that these are, cons to the situation. If it costs Bryce Huff to bring in Bosa plus like this additional capital, obviously you do it. But I would just wonder what this move would entail for the future and, can we continue to build this thing? Because obviously we know Rodgers is here for this year and obviously and potentially next year as well. Do you tie yourself to a situation where you can't upgrade the team next year if needed? Just these questions have to be answered, and obviously, we trust Joe Douglas to make the right decision in these particular situations. So, what would a move entail? Like I said, you're looking at first round pick in 25. We can't really do much with our first round pick next year because it's tied to the Rodgers trade. Obviously, we all know the trade details there. It's a second round pick. If he plays 65% less snaps, 65% or more, it costs a first round pick. So we have a little bit of an issue there as far as our flexibility to move that draft pick. So we'd have to go into 2025 wagering that first round pick. Again, I'd rather have Nick Bosa now than a first round pick 2 years from now, but, F them picks is the kind of a thing that we all talk about when it comes down to, like, a win now type of team, but F them picks feels good now, but feels terrible later. So what does that move look like? Especially when you gotta come up with a cash outlay for Bosa. Right now, the Jets look like they're a team with 25 million in cap space next year. What does that contract look like that we have to give Bosa? As fake as the cap is and always looks like there's a team that has, like, 10 million cap space, but all of a sudden signs a bunch of players. The cap isn't fake. It's just the the ability to manipulate the cap is what a lot of teams do. You look at teams like, you know, the the Saints who for years were, signing players and kicking that salary cap down the road. The past couple of years, they've found themselves in a little bit of a cap situation where they had to let, um, players walk, like Marcus Williams last year. So again, the Jets are in a win now window. A guy like Bosa would definitely increase our chances and our likelihood of that, especially because familiarity playing with 49ers under Robert Saleh for a couple years. This is something that definitely needs to be explored if it is available. I just wonder, based on what it would take from a draft capital standpoint and a contract standpoint, is that something that Jets have the appetite to do? And going with Adams as well, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cap tied to him for the next couple of years. I want to say if the Raiders were to cut him this year, or not cut him, trade him this year, there'd be a dead cap of around 50 million on his current contract, where he has a cap hit of 15 million. Doesn't really make sense from a team standpoint. If the Jets were in a situation like that where they had a player of Devante Adams' caliber, obviously, putting ourselves in the Raiders' shoes here. If we had a player of Devontae Adams' caliber, does it really make sense for us to move on from a player when it costs us more to trade him than it does just to keep him around? Could he force his hand? Could he kind of force a trade out type of situation? All these things are possible, but just wonder if that's even realistic. And maybe something does come to fruition later on the season. I think when you look at the receiver position, if there's an upgrade available, maybe Mike Evans being an option there. You know, Obviously Tampa Bay, we kind of get the gist from them that they're kind of a team in the next phase of, or probably beginning the next phase of a rebuild. Obviously Brady retired last year, and they have Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask over there. Baker Mayfield's probably gonna be the starter there if it hasn't been named already. Probably will be the starter. So I think this is a situation where they'll start the season with him, see how things go. But obviously, maybe that's another situation where he can force his way out because he's an older player that maybe doesn't want to kind of be in those initial stages of a rebuild. But also maybe he likes Florida enough. A lot of players like to finish up their careers in Florida. Maybe he's on that retirement track and just wants to finish his last, few years in Tampa. But what better way to increase your resume? You've already worked with Tom Brady, won a Super Bowl with him. Maybe you come to the Jets and earn a second Super Bowl with another elite quarterback, and that can only help his career statistics standpoint. So definitely options to consider for much later in the year. But for now, we have our 53-man roster, we have our players, and what's next? Obviously, 9/11, Buffalo Bills were, as I mentioned earlier, 12 days away from the start of the 8 days away from the start of the regular season, but 12 days away from our start of the regular season. And obviously, some news from the Bills: Von Miller will not be playing that game, so obviously little bit of a help there from a Jets offensive line standpoint. We all know the struggles that we've had with the offensive line throughout training camp. Now Dwayne Brown's back. Makai's got his spot on the right side. I think it's gonna be a lot better than we originally expected, assuming the offensive line stays healthy. But obviously, it would have been a huge test for Makai and Dwayne Brown, both with Von Miller, potentially playing in that game. But with him being left on the PUP list, he's gonna miss the first 4 weeks as he's recovering from that ACL injury. So a little bit of positive news on that as far as obviously you'd like to see the Bills as full strength, as well as ourselves, but it's definitely something that helps us as we kind of shift towards the regular season with an offensive line that really hasn't played with each other much throughout the course of the preseason and training camp. These next couple of weeks are going to be critical for them to build that chemistry and develop kind of trust with one another. And, the regular season opens up 9/11. That's going to be a madhouse. Can't wait to talk more about it. If you haven't already, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Relatively new here with very limited followers. Would appreciate as much support as I can get. And most importantly, let's go Jets.